today we start a study of the book of Proverbs. The book of Proverbs. So for the next 12 or 13 weeks, we're going to be studying this very important Old Testament book of Proverbs. Now, as you probably know, I'm trying to find it here. Hold on. We're almost there. As you probably know, this is a very practical book. It's a very practical book. In fact, that's one of the reasons I chose for us to work through it. It gives us lots of practical instruction for day-to-day living in the world. For living in such a way that God is pleased. Right? And for living in such a way that is conducive to human flourishing in this life, all things being equal. And don't we need this? Don't we need this kind of thing? We all want to do what is right and good. At least I hope we do, right? We certainly should. We all want to do what's right and good and helpful and productive. And we should want these things. And yet, navigating through this world is not always easy. Sure, we have God's moral law. That's extremely important. You cannot overstate the importance of having God's moral law in the Bible. We have laws like don't murder, don't steal, don't commit adultery, right? And this often makes it easy to know what's right and wrong, right? Just knowing God's law makes it easy to know what's right to do. But there are two complications that confront us in this fallen world in this respect that I want to bring up. Two complications. One is the recognition that knowing what's right doesn't always translate into doing what's right. Am I right? I'm right on it, right? We have three enemies that constantly conspire against us when it comes to the pursuit of righteousness. The world, the flesh, and the devil. So, besides knowing God's law, we need some additional help in gaining the motivation, right? To do what's right. As well as knowledge. We need knowledge of the ways our enemies work, and they work tirelessly. The ways our enemies work to deny us that motivation, right? And tempt us to do what we know is wrong. Secondly, there's the recognition that even knowing the right thing to do is sometimes difficult. Knowing the right thing to do is sometimes difficult. Not always. There is plenty that's black and white, but not everything. Not every moral issue is black and white. Sometimes there's a lot of gray that we have to peer through in order to discern what is right or what is the right or best course of action. Sometimes there are moral dilemmas. We talked about those before, right? There are moral dilemmas that we have to face in which there seems to be, at least on the surface, there seems to be a conflict of moral principles, right? Like, for example, the paradigm example I always use in my classes, when you have to decide whether to lie or not to the Nazis who are asking if you're hiding Jews in your attic, and you are, right? Right? There are people who had to face that in real life, that very dilemma. And sometimes we face decisions that aren't really moral at all, not moral issues at all. Any choice that we make would in this case be morally okay, but we'd like to know which one is the best decision, right? Like what college to go to, or whether or not to have that surgery that your doctor is recommending, right? Those aren't necessarily moral issues, and yet we need guidance, right? Well, God gave us the book of Proverbs to help us with these things. I believe that. This is why He gave us the book of Proverbs, to help us with these things, to help us navigate the complexities of this fallen world so as to please God and flourish in the world as far as that's possible this side of heaven. Okay. So we're going to begin tonight by looking at the opening verses of Proverbs, verses 1 through 7, which every commentary I've read says that this is the introduction to the whole book, the first 7 verses. So let's read that. Chapter 1, verses 1 through 7. The Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel, to know wisdom and instruction, to discern the sayings of understanding, to receive instruction in wise behavior, righteousness, justice, and equity, to give prudence to the naive, to the youth knowledge and discretion. A wise man will hear and increase in learning, and a man of understanding will acquire wise counsel. To understand a proverb and a figure, the words of the wise and their riddles. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. Notice the book opens by saying, notice the words, the Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel. This tells us that Solomon is the principal author of this book. I believe that. Now, later on, as we read on in the book, we'll see that the book itself explicitly tells us that there were other authors who contributed Proverbs, right, in the book. But nevertheless, the main one was Solomon. And notice that what Solomon writes here are Proverbs. That's the word that he uses. Proverbs. That's what he contains in this book. What's a proverb? A saying. Okay. Can you elaborate? What kind of saying?
They're always little wise quotes.
Yeah, exactly. It's little. So some people use the word pithy, right? They're pithy sayings, which pithy means short and easily memorizable. At least that's how I take that word to mean, right? So yeah, usually short, easily to be remembered, wise sayings, right? They're sayings that provide us with practical advice, right? Or guidance. A phrase you may have heard is sage advice. Sage advice is not advice about sage, the herb, to how to use it, right? Sage means, what does sage mean, Nicholas? You're not Nicholas, but that's okay. Wise. A sage is a wise man. That's right. And sage can be used as a adjective as well, right? So yeah, wise. So they're wise sayings. Now we're all familiar with Proverbs, right? And I'm not asking about the book of Proverbs. I'm asking just Proverbs, right?
My Bible at the top, I've written maybe in another study. It says to compare or be like.
That's Proverbs. A lot of Proverbs are exactly that. We'll see that later on. Some Proverbs are similes or comparisons. That's exactly right. Good point. But we're all familiar with Proverbs. Didn't your mom and dad, at least most of y'all, so at least us older folks anyway, didn't they teach you a lot of moral lessons through some famous English proverbs? I've learned in my classes at the university, I bring this up, and most of the students don't know any of the proverbs that I quote as to illustrate what I'm about to do here in a minute, which is sad, because I think they're valuable ways of learning moral lessons and practical, wise lessons. All that glitters is not gold. What does that mean? You ever heard that, Nicholas? You ever heard that? So you've heard at least that one proverb. Okay.
Fake gold.
What's that?
Fake gold.
Fake gold, right. All that glitters is not gold. But of course, the proverb is not about gold. What's it about? What's it saying?
Some things look good, but they're not.
But they're not. Some things you might do, some things you might choose, may look good on the outside, but they're not. So, you got to look deeper. A bird in the hand is worth two in the bush.
I heard that all my life.
That's one of my favorites.
I love it too.
What does that mean? What does that mean?
It's better to have one thing instead of wanting the two things when you might, it's better to take what you have than worry about having something else.
That's right, because the two in the bush you might not catch, right? It's better to have the one bird you've got than the two birds that might get away if you go after them, right? And of course, a moral lesson here is, like you said, be content with what you have, right, rather than wishing for something that is very iffy, right? Better safe than sorry. Ever heard that one? Mm-hmm. What's that mean? That one's probably almost self-explanatory, right? If you got a choice between doing something safe and doing something dangerous, which one do you do? Better safe than sorry, right? Because you do the dangerous thing, you're likely to be sorry. This is why I'm never going to jump off a bridge with a bungee cord.
That bridge makes you scared. You have to go over it, let alone yourself out off of it.
So, all right, how about here's one. None of my students know what this means. But it's one of the best ones. A stitch in time saves 9. Ever heard that one, Miss Sandra?
Well, sure.
A stitch in time saves 9? What does that one mean?
If you do that at the right time, it's better than repeating that same process over, making mistakes and having to correct it.
That's exactly right. But it's taking a lesson from sewing, right? You have a piece of clothing, the hem is coming unraveled, right? Mm-hmm. If you stitch it up at the beginning before it gets bad, it's going to save you a lot of trouble later trying to fix it when it gets worse, right? So the point of the proverb is deal with problems early before they fester and get worse. Right? Isn't that what it means?
Is it in Proverbs, or did they just tell us this? It reminded me of what you said.
Yeah.
Do it right the first time so you don't have to lick your cat over.
Yeah. There you go. All right, one more, just for fun. Don't count your chickens before they're hatched. Right? We all heard that one? What does that mean? It's not about chickens, although it could be. Right?
Don't put too much hope in something.
Yeah. If you're expecting to win the Publishers Clearinghouse, don't go spending money before you actually do.
Right.
That's an extreme example, but you get the point, right? You don't count your chickens before they hatch because they might hatch and be dead, right? See? So,
My friend and I took on an extra job that the administrator asked us to do, and we plotted our strategy with all the extra money we were going to make. Mm-hmm. And time they took the taxes out, we didn't have any.
That's the way it goes. Say what?
So we need to tell that to all these gamblers.
All the gamblers. One of my favorite examples of this proverb having should have been followed, it's a silly, cheesy example, is from that Christmas movie, Christmas Vacation, where Chevy Chase puts the down payment on the swimming pool, thinking he's going to get the bonus check from his boss, but it turns out to be a year-long supply of jam for fruit or something, right? Whatever it was. Jelly of the Month Club or something. Anyway, all right. Now, these proverbs, and I could go on and on and on. I got a lot more than just those, right? But these obviously provide good, sound advice that every person would be wise to follow. Am I right? How much more then the Proverbs that God himself inspired Solomon and others to write for us in the biblical book of Proverbs? Don't you think those are going to be valuable? If those English Proverbs are useful, this can't be otherwise, right? Absolutely. So with that in mind, notice what Solomon goes on to say about the purpose of the book in general and the Proverbs in particular. Let's go back and look at verses 2 and 3 again. It says to know, that there's Proverbs are given to us to know wisdom and instruction, to discern the sayings of understanding, to receive instruction in wise behavior, righteousness, justice, and equity. The ultimate prize, think about it, look at those verses. The ultimate prize to be gained from this book is, in a word, wisdom. Wisdom. Instruction that leads to wise behavior, wise choices, right? Instruction that leads to, notice all the words he uses here, that leads to righteousness, which is conformity to God's law. Instruction that leads to justice. That's decisions that are just and fair, right? And then another word there is equity. Instructions that lead to equity. I actually don't like that word. I don't like that translation. Nothing wrong with the word, although it's been abused in recent years in our country. But I don't think that's the right translation, though, even though several modern versions, like even the one I'm reading here, the New American Standard, uses that word, equity. The Hebrew word here is yashar, which typically means straight or upright. Let me show you an example of this elsewhere. Look at 1 Samuel. Go back to 1 Samuel. Same Hebrew word. 1 Samuel chapter 6. I'll get there one day. 1 Samuel 6, verse 12. Notice what it says. And the cows took the straight way in the direction of Bethshemesh. They went along the highway, lowing as they went, and did not turn aside to the right or to the left. And the lords of the Philistines followed them to the border of Bethshemesh. These are the cows carrying the Ark of the Covenant back away from the Philistines back to David, right? Because the Ark was killing them. So they put it on a cart, and the cows carry it back, right? But notice, the word straight there is the word yashar. The cows went straight up the road, you see. So in the area of morality, then, the word has to do with staying on the right moral path, right? Walking a straight line, morally speaking, right? Yeah, go ahead.
I could have asked this after.
Yeah.
What do you think of some of the Hebrew scholars who would equate that with profit versus equity?
Well, yeah, I don't know. I haven't looked at that in any depth, but I'm just basing what I'm saying on my very brief study of the Hebrew word, which typically means straight and is clearly translated that way in Samuel. So talking about like financial profit, I don't know where that would come from, but maybe there's a nuance of the word I'm not aware of. Yeah, have you run across that?
Yeah, I'll have to see what I saw, and it's really It's a strange thing. I was just curious if you did.
I don't know. I haven't heard that before. Yeah, go ahead.
It seems like most translations use that word, but it seems that CSB uses it.
I was just about to quote the CSB. What does the CSB use?
Integrity.
Integrity. That's the word I think is right, based on what I've studied. Integrity. Staying straight. Keeping your integrity. I think that's what it means. Exactly. So that's in the Christian Standard Bible that it came from, right? Very good. But yeah, I looked at several translations, and I think the CSB is the only one I could find that translated it that way, which... Anyway, that's right. All right, look at verse 4. To give prudence to the naive, to the youth, to the youth, knowledge and discretion. The word naive, the King James translate that simple, right? Simple or naive. The naive person or the simple person is the morally unschooled person, right? Someone who, without wisdom, is easily led astray. You might even think of it as a gullible person, right? What will the naive or the simple gain from this book? According to verse 4.
Knowledge and discretion.
Knowledge, well, that's the second line. And the first line, to give prudence to the naive, in my translation. What does yours say?
Yeah,
Prudence. Prudence is another word for wisdom. Practical knowledge, right? But then you brought up the youth there. Verse 4 also addresses the youth. Now, it might be humorous, but I think it's actually on purpose that he mentions the naive in one line, the unschooled, morally unschooled, and then it mentions the youth in the very next line. That's on purpose, guys. Sorry. Who, more than anyone, is more likely to be unschooled morally than the young, right? Wisdom usually comes, at least in part, from not books, from what? Well, other people and experience, right? And one thing that young people lack is experience. So it's not a bad thing. Well, in one sense it is, but it's not their fault that young people might not have a lot of wisdom. That we all start off that way, right? We all start off needing to learn things. And I'm not saying you guys aren't wise. You're probably wiser now than you were 10 years ago, let's say. I hope that's true, right? What does the proverb promise or offer to the youth? Discretion. Exactly. What does that mean? What's another word for discretion? Or are there other words for that? Discretion.
Ability to make a decision between right and wrong.
Very good. But a word for that would be discernment. Right? Discretion, discernment, those words mean something very close to the same thing. So this book offers to the young discernment. Discernment between right and wrong. Discernment of what constitutes the narrow, straight path, as opposed to going to the left or the right. All right, look at verses 5 and 6. A wise man will hear and increase in learning, and a man of understanding will acquire wise counsel. To understand a proverb and a figure, the words of the wise and their riddles. This is interesting. The wise here is contrasted with the naive of verse 4, right? The naive will gain wisdom from this book, but guess what? Even those who already are wise will gain from this book. That's what it's saying in verses 5 and 6. The naive gain wisdom from the book, but even those who are already wise can increase their wisdom. And they can increase their wisdom by being exposed, according to verse 6, being exposed to and being stretched by proverbs, parables, and riddles, which is what this book contains. Verse 7 is a crucial verse. Most scholars believe that it's thematic of the whole book, setting out a motto, if you will, that is in fact an important theological and ethical principle. Let's read verse 7 again. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. The principle here is actually repeated twice more in this same book. That same principle, or something very close to it. Look over chapter 9, Proverbs 9, verse 10. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. Isn't that same, more or less the same thing? Turn over to chapter 15, Proverbs 15, verse 33. The fear of the Lord is the instruction for wisdom, and before honor comes humility. Not only is it that principle contained 3 times in the book of Proverbs, it actually shows up in 2 other books. Flip back to the book of Psalms. Psalm 110. I'm sorry, 111. Psalm 111. And verse 10. Psalm 111, verse 10. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. A good understanding have all those who do His commandments. His praise endures forever. And one more place, the book of Job. Go back to Job, chapter 28. Job 28 and verse 28. And to man he said, behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom. Obviously, can we miss it? Obviously, this is a very important principle, right? Repeated 5 times. 3 times in Proverbs, twice elsewhere, right? It's a very important principle. The question, though, is what does it mean? What does it mean? The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, or the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Let me first tell you what I think it doesn't mean. And I'm basing my comments on the way it's presented in chapter 1, verse 7, right? Where it appears the first time in this book. Because Proverbs 1:7 uses the word knowledge here rather than wisdom. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. There are some who think that this verse sets out for us the fundamental basis of a whole theory of knowledge. What philosophers call an epistemology. Right? You don't need to know that word, but some of y'all have heard that word, right? That this verse provides the basis for a whole epistemology, a biblical epistemology, a biblical theory of knowledge. So they say that unless a person fears God, unless he is a Christian believer, he can't really know anything. I've heard that people say that based on this verse. So the unbeliever, for example, cannot know that the sky is blue, cannot know that 2 plus 2 equals 4? Because that verse tells them they can't. Because they don't fear God. And without fearing God, you can't begin knowledge. You see? Well, I think that view is obviously false. It's obviously false. If that's what the verse means, we've got an error in the Bible. Right? It doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that at all. And I think we know that. I'm going to show you that we know that. Solomon is not trying to do epistemology here. He's doing ethics. He's doing ethics. And that makes all the difference in the world. So let me show you some of the things. Notice that the verse itself is an example of Hebrew parallelism. Some of y'all have heard me talk about that before. In Hebrew poetry, and most of the book of Proverbs is in poetic style. The first line parallels the second line, and vice versa. There are different kinds of parallelism. Some parallelisms are synonymous parallels, where the second line repeats the first line in different words, but it conveys the same basic idea. Some parallelisms contrast the previous verse, the previous line. First line says one thing, and the other thing says what the opposite truth would be, right? A wise person does X, a foolish person does Y, right? You see. And that kind of parallelism occurs all throughout the book of Proverbs. Both kinds, actually. There are other kinds of parallelism, but once you realize that this is parallelism, you know that Solomon's not doing epistemology here. Because notice the second half of this same verse sets up a comparison or contrast with the first half. And what word is parallel with knowledge in the second half? Wisdom. Wisdom. So the word knowledge should be taken as a synonym for wisdom. Keep in mind, of course, that the word knowledge, English word knowledge anyway, and the Hebrew word too actually, can be used to mean several different things. We use the word knowledge to mean several different kinds of things that are radically different, in fact, right? There's what we call propositional knowledge. It's a technical word, Judy. Propositional knowledge, philosophers talk about that, right? This is knowledge of facts, such as the sky is blue, or 2 plus 2 equals 4. Anytime you have a sentence that goes, I know that, and fill in the blank, that's propositional knowledge, right? Okay? I know that the sky is blue, or I know that my name is Steve, something like that, right? If Solomon was doing epistemology, that's the kind of knowledge he'd be talking about, right? But there's also practical knowledge. There's know-how, right? Or closely related to that, wisdom. Wisdom is a type of knowledge. Wisdom, of course, you've heard this before. Wisdom is the practical application of knowledge to real life situations, right? And the parallelism in the verse tells us that this is what Solomon means, right? This is also strongly confirmed by the fact that everywhere else, this principle, I said it occurs 5 times, 3 times in Proverbs, twice, once in Psalms and once in Job. Everywhere else, the principle is stated. It doesn't use the word knowledge. It uses the word wisdom every time. Right? But now the question arises, okay, what does it mean? What does Solomon mean when he says that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom? What does that mean? You tell me. What does that mean? Well, I didn't think it'd be that hard. It's the beginning of wisdom.
It's the foundation of why wisdom is fear of God.
Yeah, I think that's it. You're on the right track. Here's what I wrote in my notes, but it overlaps with that. True wisdom, truly wise living, which is what wisdom is all about, is living in worshipful submission to God. Living in worshipful submission to God. True wisdom consists in acknowledging that there is a God with whom we have to do. Right? And that He holds us accountable for what we do in this world. That's what it means to fear God. And that's the first step in wisdom, I believe. The first step in wisdom. True wisdom prioritizes God and what He thinks and what He wants for us. Right? That's true wisdom.
It's like respect.
Yes.
If I respect my mother or father, I'm going to listen to what they say, and I'm going to learn.
That's exactly right. That's a great example. Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. Jesus puts it this way. Seek first the kingdom of God and its righteousness. That's right. His apostle, Paul, says in 1 Corinthians, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do it all, what? Oh, I thought y'all know that verse. What's that?
In the name of the Lord.
Close. To the glory of God. Whether you eat or whether you drink or whatever you do it all to the glory or for the glory of God. That is what true wisdom is all about. All right, that's all I'm going to do tonight. Now, let me just go ahead and tell you right now what we're going to be doing going forward. I am not going to be going through Proverbs chapter by chapter and verse by verse. And the reason is because with only a couple of exceptions, Proverbs is not organized thematically or topically at all. It just skips around. It'll talk about, for example, the right use of money in one chapter, and then the very next verse will move on to talk about how to treat your children. And then it'll come back to money again later on, 3 chapters later, right? So if you want to know about what the book teaches about money, you got to skip around. So what are we going to do, Nicholas? We're going to skip around. I'm going to present this book topically, all right? And I'm going to select 10 or 11, maybe 12 different topics, and we're going to cover those topics in the book of Proverbs over the course of 12 or 13 weeks, right? Topically.
We're going to cover every verse, though, right? Eventually.
I'm not going to swear I'm going to actually read and quote every verse, even though I know that's what you want. But I won't ignore anything that I think is definitely relevant to the topic. It may be that there's a verse later that says exactly the same thing as one other verse. No reason we're going to have to read both of those, right? Just for the sake of time. Hope you understand that, right? But I'll read everything that I think is necessary for us to get the topic down, right? So it's not intended to be an exhaustive study of the book, but a pretty in-depth, hopefully, topical study of the main topics that the book covers about living in the world, about life, right? We'll talk about a proper use of money. We'll talk about parents and their children. We'll talk about husbands and their wives. We'll talk about wisdom, right? There's a lot more to just be said about wisdom itself. And that's going to be our first topic next week, wisdom. And there are many other topics, right, that we can talk about. How to relate to government, right? Things like that. Work. One of my favorite proverbs is, look at the ant, you sluggard.